Thank you everybody for joining us today for the launch of our Breaking Taboos campaign. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm on. I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. This was and always will be Aboriginal land. Today's discussion is a really important issue for all of us that are here, but I think when compared to other Australian women, Aboriginal women certainly experience greater levels of socioeconomic disadvantage, racism, higher rates of incarceration, decreased health literacy, and a lack of culturally appropriate services. And it's these factors that definitely influence a women's health outcomes. And so I wanted to use this meeting just as a reminder that we are not yet an equal society. And when our Aboriginal sisters continue to experience poorer health outcomes, there is more work to be done. And I really do hope that our campaign, the one that we're running even across our own industry, that as it continues to shift the national conversation around issues that are relating to reproductive health, that our campaign can lend itself into improving the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. My name's Julia Angrisana and I'm the National Secretary of the FSU, and I extend a warm welcome to everybody, and I really thank you for attending the launch of our campaign. Our campaign we've called it Breaking Taboos. You've probably already seen on your screen that we are recording today's event. Today I will be joined by FSU delegates Sasha Hammersley and Caroline Troop, FSU members who are going to be sharing their lived experiences of menopause and menstruation from the perspective of workers. And we'll also hear from Angela Krakenall, Head of People Advisory and Engagement at Aware Super, who's going to share some of her thoughts from an employer's perspective. But I think that both workers, both Sasha and Caroline, along with Angela from Aware Super, they're going to be making the point that menopause and menstruation are workplace issues, and it's time that they were treated like other forms of leave that the finance industry has really led the way on, like paid parental leave, like family and domestic violence leave. We believe this is really the next important and progressive leave and flexibility framework that as an industry we can lead for our industry, but of course for workers right across the economy. Before we hear from them, I wanted to really just highlight some of the key findings in our recent survey, and these findings have helped shape our menopause and menstrual leave policy framework. The framework's been designed to provide workers and employers with vital information about the importance of paid leave and the ways in which we can provide support to workers who are struggling to balance the symptoms of menopause and menstruation whilst they're at work. It's a great guide, and I really would encourage you to have a look. You can access the framework by clicking through on the QR code that you can see on your screen, and you'll also find a link to the framework in the chat. Okay, so let's get into it. What did almost 700 workers tell us about their symptoms of menopause and menstruation? And what did we learn from that in terms of how that is impacting them at work? What has been their experience across the finance industry? And what are the types of flexibilities and leave that workers can access to better support them? That's really what we're going to spend this session looking into. Firstly, the first and I think the most important thing that the survey found was that the symptoms of menopause are not well known. And the culture of silence means that the impact of menopause on workers is hidden. Of those who responded to our survey and reported that their menopausal status was having an impact on their work, over 75% chose not to disclose their menopausal status at work. That's a really big proportion. 75% chose not to disclose their menopausal status at work. And why was that? Well, it comes down to their concerns about the social stigma that's associated to menopause. And for the majority, those stigmas are a greater barrier than their concerns about privacy. We received similar feedback about periods. Many described a menstrual silence, a shame of ignorance, and an awkwardness. And we know that those feelings are absolutely counter to a woman's fundamental well-being. That's why we've named our campaign Breaking Taboos. breaking taboos, because we need to be talking about these issues, because we believe that it's through the conversations that we're having that we will start to normalize it. And when we normalize it, when we do that, then we're raising awareness of the symptoms. And when we raise those awareness, the awareness of those symptoms, then we can better understand what kind of support, what kind of flexibility, what kind of leave do workers need. In a moment, we're going to show you a graph. Here it is. It lists the reasons that workers are not disclosing the impact that of menopause at work. You can see here it's concerns about being perceived negatively, worried that their abilities might be questioned. My line manager is a man, concerns that it might affect my career progression. And I think just as we saw in that last slide, that quote from that anonymous worker who said, I'm already experiencing ageism. So highlighting an age-related issue like menopause would make me feel less valuable. So I'm just going to stay quiet. I'm not going to bring attention to myself. I think that quote essentially captures what this data set is showing us here on the screen. But workers were really clear in their responses. They said that the issues of menopause and menstruation, they have to be addressed. We have to talk about them in the same way that really we thought about mental health a few decades ago. It also had a stigma attached to it, and we've broken that taboo. And so we need to do that now for these issues. Stigmas and taboos need to be broken. That's how we allow those people who are experiencing that menopausal transition or who are suffering from difficult or severe periods, that's how we support them through that, by breaking the taboo, by destigmatizing this issue. Because a consequence of us not talking about it means that workers aren't even aware of the causes. We saw that in our survey, and we've seen that most recently in some of the evidence to the recent Senate inquiry. Workers just expressed a frustration about the lack of understanding. And I think that lack of understanding, both for themselves but for others, meant that some people just think this is just a mildly inconvenient thing that you're just going through. Like, can't you just work it out? Can't you just kind of suck it up? And I think that came through a lot of women just not feeling heard or not feeling properly understood. And I think on this point, I'd like to bring in Sasha Hammersley. I wonder if you, Sasha, have heard those kind of comments, like just mildly inconvenient, just suck it up. Have you heard that? And really, we'd love for you to be able to use the time in this moment to just share your own lived experience. Thanks, Sasha.
Sure, thanks, Julia. Mildly inconvenient is probably something that I probably thought myself 10 years ago. I had only a 2-day period for the majority of my life, and 2 days, an hour of cramping, no issues. I was able to continue on with my life. It wasn't until I started to have children that the first signs that that 2-day period was an issue and that it had been affecting me previously throughout my working life. I struggled to fall pregnant and struggled to keep pregnancies. So I have had 12 pregnancies, 9 of which resulted in miscarriage, 3 of which resulted in beautiful children who are, you know, um, the pride of my life. Now, as when I started to realize that I had polycystic ovarian syndrome, it made me really start to think about the symptoms that I'd had previously and realize that it was actually affecting my life and my work. I had, as I said, polycystic ovarian syndrome. And then when my third baby was born, everything went to hell in hell basket. Sorry for the, using hell in hell basket. I have said that the floodgates opened because I bled consistently for 2 years. My managers, although were very supportive, didn't know what to do with me. I once expelled a marina in the toilets, which is an IUD. I nearly passed out, but what could I do? I didn't have any leave left. I put the IUD in the rubbish bin and went back onto the floor. Mildly inconvenient having to have showers throughout the day at work because you've bled through your clothes. Having spare clothes in the car because just in case, you did bleed through those clothes. Mildly inconvenient having to wear dresses as opposed to pants because it was easier to deal with blood running down your leg. So then, a whole change of clothes. I think I then had to have a hysterectomy, mildly inconvenient, having to have a hysterectomy, 6 weeks of absolute pain and recovery time done in your long service leave because you don't have any leave at all. And then another 2 years later, another operation where I had to have my ovaries removed, putting me in menopause at the age of 42. Mildly inconvenient, another 7 weeks of recovery after an operation. I'm saying mildly inconvenient because my leaders didn't know how to deal with me. Throughout those 2 years of constant bleeding, I had so much time off work that it was affecting my take home pay because I had unpaid leave. I could not have gone to work on some of those days. Um, this is my first time in my working life that I still have sick leave available at this time of the year, because previously I had used up all my sick leave on my caring responsibilities and my time at home, where I just could not get out of bed due to pain, severe pain and bleeding. It again affected my take home pay to the point where my employer did an audit of all long service leave and realized that all these people that had taken unpaid leave were not actually supposed to have as much long service leave as they could. I lost 1 whole week of my long service leave. Colleagues of mine lost 3 weeks due to unpaid leave. It's also affected my annual leave as well. So I guess now that I'm in full menopause, I have brain fog. I work in a highly legislated area of the bank. I am dealing with people's mortgages. I'm writing mortgages. The risk to the bank and myself and the customers is quite large, and yet I'm still expected to push through these mildly inconvenient symptoms.
Sasha, thank you so much for sharing your own personal and lived experience. And I hope that when you get a chance to read the Senate report, that I know you and many of our members contributed through the survey, but also directly into the submission that we made, that you can feel validated and heard, because that report picks up on exactly what you've just described, the need to having to tap into my own leave, having to use my own paid time, and reducing that leave, which is meant to be for time with my family or time on for travel and leisure. So thank you so much for sharing that. That's been really powerful and really important as we break the taboos today. We also, I mean, Sasha just shared that experience around her menopausal transition and her experience there. But we also heard from members who suffered with severe and debilitating symptoms relating to their painful periods. And I think the fact that some workers menstruate is very well understood. Everybody understands that, of course, but there is still a stigma and a taboo attached to that. And it means that workers who experience severe symptoms are less likely to speak up, and they're less likely to ask for help to mitigate those symptoms. We're going to pull up a slide here. It says this one was really asking people about, we know that workers who menstruate at some point in their lives make up half of the workers in our industries. This is why this is so important to our union. This graph shows the impact that periods is having on our ability to do our work, and 78% of people who replied said that painful periods are having an impact on my ability to do my job. We know this is a normal biological reality. It occurs monthly for half of the workforce. And I make this point, to an audience of people who I think understand this, but menstruation is not a sickness. In most cases, it's something that we can be reasonably predicting that event every month. I spoke with a member, Jessie, and she really wanted to be here today to share her story, but due to a clash with some training at her workplace, she couldn't get the time off. And she really wanted me to share this story with you, her story. She works in a big bank call centre in the chat messaging team. She's in her late 30s. She suffered from polycystic ovarian syndrome since she was 14, then diagnosed with endometriosis in her mid 30s, and most recently diagnosed with adenomyosis, which is a condition that I wasn't familiar with and had to look up, actually. I think at the end of the day, when Jessie was talking to me about this, she said, these conditions have left me in just chronic pain. daily. I'm in pain every single day. It's to varying levels. Some days are better than others, but it's pain that I need to manage every day, is how she described it. And she said, I work in a workplace where I don't have a support framework in place. The only really response from my management was just go home. So every time I was in pain, their response was time to pack up and head home. But that's just not a viable response, because I don't have, Jessie says, I don't have that much personal leave to cover those times. So she said, after many, many years, I've just learnt to lean in and to live with it. They were her words: lean in and live with it and manage it as best as she can. And so she said, I've got a heat bag in the locker, I've got a disposable ice pack, I've got a box of medication, I've got all those things. I used to have a fan on my desk, but with agile working, the fan doesn't fit in the locker, so I can't use that. And she said it just really leaves her trying to navigate this question of, well, how much pain is too much pain? When's the best time to use my sick leave so so that I can rest from this episode? And she said that's been a real struggle. She said her team leader is a wonderful person and very well-meaning, but urging me to go home every time and use my sick leave doesn't help, because I'm just depleting that balance of sick leave. And every time I have to kind of negotiate in my own mind, she said, am I going to have a worse attack tomorrow? Do I need to leave my leave for something that might be worse than today? And so I just lean in and I learn to live with it, and I'm working through the pain. Whilst I've shared with you Jessie's story on the screen, we've got many, many stories just like that one. We were really overwhelmed by those lived experiences from many women who were suffering from severe period pain in particular. When I asked Jessie about the types of workplace flexibilities that would make her life easier, she said that work from home was a game changer for her. Allowing her to work while she was managing her symptoms at her house really helped. But when she's at work, knowing that she could take perhaps breaks in between her work, but certainly having the availability of a quiet space or a dark room, that they've set that up. They've managed to set something up for her that she can use when she needs it. I think that's a really important story, because today we want to be talking about both the symptoms of menstruation and menopause. I think you can see from this graph on the screen that other members expressed similar feedback. When we asked workers why they chose to either disclose or not disclose their menstrual status to their line managers, it came back to stigma, and it came back to this belief that this is just a private matter, and a fear, as we heard earlier, that they would be perceived negatively. We also saw that for a smaller number of those who said that they felt safe to disclose, they did so because they had a supportive manager, or indeed their manager was a woman. And I think that's a really, really interesting observation, because we know that our industry is highly segregated. Almost 60% of all manager roles are filled by men. And the more senior the role, then the more gender segregation we see. And I think given this gender breakup, and that we've got only a very small number of workers that are willing to disclose the impact that their periods is having on them, I really can't overstate today the importance of improving education on this, and lifting workplace education, and having a campaign so that we've got workers and managers really understanding what's happening as a result of these symptoms or these experiences. I think, when we've been talking to our members, they've said, I'm not disclosing to my male boss because he's not going to understand what I'm going through. I hardly understand what this transition means. So I think education has a really important role to play in our Breaking Taboos campaign, because it will help fill that knowledge gap. And with that knowledge gap filled, we will start to see women feel more supported. This graph shows that over 35% of workers experiencing menopause identified it as a factor in early retirement, while over half of menopausal workers cited menopause as a reason not to pursue a promotional opportunity. And we also had members participate in our survey who said, I've actually already left work. I retired early because the menopausal symptoms, like severe migraines, were just incompatible with my demands at work. I didn't think I had an option, so I've already retired. And these workers felt that they just had little choice when faced to manage the symptoms, along with the combination of that lack of understanding, the stigma, and the taboos that are associated with the discussions that they should be having so that they can remain at the workplace. Today is actually the Equal Pay Day in the finance industry. And it's a day that highlights the ongoing gender inequality in our workplaces. Because whilst the financial year started on the 1st of July, of course, but for women in the finance sector, it doesn't really start until today, the 19th of September, because women in our sector have to work an extra 78 days in the year to earn the same as men. And so this issue really has a clear connection to the gender pay gap. We've got one of the biggest gender pay gaps in Australia in the finance industry. And I think much of that we know has has to do with the lack of women in senior roles. And menopause often hits workers at a point where their careers are in the pipeline for senior roles. They've come back after a period of leave for caring and family responsibilities. They're moving up, but instead of progressing, they just hold themselves back, and they hold themselves back because they start to experience those symptoms of menopause. And having the flexibility and the leave if you need it, we are confident would result in more workers feeling that they had the right level of support and that they would remain in the workplace for longer. And so that's why it was so important to make the connection between addressing this issue as addressing the gender pay gap. And to the point that I made earlier or a moment ago, we need more senior women in leadership roles, not less. I think it's at this point that I'd like to invite Angela, Head of People Advisory and Engagement at Aware Super, into the conversation. Aware Super has introduced a menopause policy, and we've got a very active CEO in Deanne Stewart, who's been a vocal advocate for this policy, most recently talking about the need to talk about menopause. And so we'd love to hear more about how Aware is leading that conversation, why the fund decided to introduce a support framework, and what are some of the ways that your fund is breaking the taboos.
Right, thanks, Julia. I mean, you can see here, it goes a long way having a CEO who really passionately believes in this topic. So I think that top-down kind of passion and support goes a very, very long way. For us at Aware, I think when you look at the way that our population is broken down, we've got about 54% of people across the organisation are women. And of that 54%, 36% of these women, so around 250 or so, are over the age of 45. So we really appreciate this issue and know that we've got a really big chunk of our organisation that will be going through menopause, perimenopause kind of imminently. And how do we support them? So in terms of how we implemented this, and there's some of the reasons why we implemented it. We thought it was really important and looked at within our own workplace and the demographics. But we knew that we needed to take a multi-pronged approach to this. And one of the first things we did was pick up the phone to Thea O'Connor, who a number of you might have heard of before, but she is the founder of Menopause at Work. So really believing in this being a workplace issue and something that we need to be driving within workplaces. So we had a conversation with her, and I'd worked with her as part of another organisation previously to look at a broader system around support for menopause specifically. But she was really a strong believer and advocate for you've got to take a multi-pronged approach, and this has to be something that you kind of build inside out in your organisation. So you could easily just say, which we did, here's a policy and some leave for your employees. But really it was more around how we're starting to break the stigma, start the conversation, educate our people, both our managers and our employees, on how to have the conversation. So a number of things that we did, we updated a number of our policies to ensure that menopause was used as an example of why you may need flexibility. We had our menopause leave that was implemented into our broader leave policy. And then we ran a number of training sessions for managers. And the conversation was around why speak about this in the workplace. And they were really well attended across the organisation, which was so great to see. And Thea actually came along to that, and she hosted a panel with Deanne, our CEO, and one of our senior male colleagues. And he did admit when he was sitting on the panel, he's like, oh, I feel a little uncomfortable because I've never spoken about this before. But when I was asked, I felt the need to come and speak and represent men like my wife, I've got sisters, a number of employees within my team are women of this age. So I feel it's really important that I step up and kind of represent. In addition, I mean, Deanne is very open and public about this topic and the way that she speaks about it. And we just share stories, I think. And the one thing that I've really seen after having these sessions, the education, sharing the collateral on our internal intranet, is that the conversation really has started, even to the extent where we've got a few women in our HR team saying, I'm really experiencing menopause symptoms today. Has anyone got a fan I can borrow? And they feel really open to talk about that. And Deanne had a number of emails that she was sent directly, where employees were just so emotionally overwhelmed and thankful that she had started the conversation. So that's just some of the ways that we've started to implement it at Aware.
That's great. It sounds like education's been really important. I'd be interested, Angela, because I know we've had some questions come through before the event started today. One of our members said, how do I talk about this in a way where I've got a male manager? I'd feel uncomfortable about that.
Mm-hmm.
Has your training kind of leaned into that specifically, and how are you supporting your male managers in this space?
Yeah, so I think yes. So it has. So some of the training's been around how to talk to your manager about menopause, how you can support your colleagues or employees through menopause, but specifically around the managers. The recommendation, and this has come through a lot of the menopause at work research and training, is that there's a number of things you can do. Flag it ahead of time that you want to have a conversation about it. I think it starts with having the conversation. Preparing your manager before you walk into the meeting to have the conversation, so it's not out of the blue, and it's almost giving them an opportunity to prepare a bit for the conversation themselves. If they don't know a lot about it, they can do their own research, etc. So a bit of kind of pre-reading as to or the purpose of the discussion, and then it's really around keeping to the facts is what we've been trained on at Aware. So some examples are come prepared with 4 key points. So number 1 is, what am I experiencing? So let's talk factually about some of the symptoms that you're experiencing. Talk about, in a very, again, factual way, how is this impacting my work? Okay. Important to also come to the table with, and this is how I'm currently managing it. So this is my own self-care, and this is what I've been doing to date. But then being really open and coming prepared with a few potential solutions on what would really help you better, because it's different for everyone. It may be, I'm in a hot desk environment and I cannot switch desks every day. I want to be at the same desk. It's right underneath the air conditioning, or I've got my fan there, whatever it may be, all the way up to, I need to, mix up my flexible working arrangement for a period of time. So it's around just being really prepared for the conversation, keeping it really factual, and coming prepared.
Angela, while you've got the call, I wanted to just pick up on those observations that I made a moment ago around the gender pay gap. Does Aware Super think about this policy as a way of addressing the gap? And also, I was interested in your perspective as a fund around the super retirement gap.
Yeah, so I think number 1, it really supports it, right? So it's just yet another reason why this is so important. It probably wasn't the main driver for us. I think you touched on it before, Julia. One of the main drivers for us was we've got over 54% of our employees who are women, and even off the back of holding some of these panel discussions, the conversations around the floor were, I had no idea that they were menopause symptoms. I had no idea that that's what my mother went through. That makes a lot of sense now. And we just don't have any of the information. Even people going through it don't know what they're going through. So that was one of the main reasons for us, was around the awareness and education. But I think when you think about, and you touched on this before, Julia, it's come through in your report, but if the average age of menopause is between kind of 50 and 51, but there's a range there of about 45 to 55, this is the prime for some women of their careers, and where they're going to be at their highest earning potential. So if you start seeing women opt out for promotion opportunities, some that are going part-time because they think that's the only way that they can address managing some of these symptoms, approximately 10%, apparently, according to some research that I've done, do actually quit and leave the workplace. I think, of course, that links directly to the gender pay gap and the amount of women that we have in senior roles. So thinking about your succession up to your senior roles. And for us, I think if you've got, seeing is believing, I guess. So we believe in the importance of having visible role models. So if you're not seeing women in the mid-level to high level manager roles, you're going to, you might not have the same aspirations, right, to do it yourself. So we do believe that, yes, it does play a role in gender equality. I think women have already taken a little bit of a hit being out of the workplace if they have chosen to become parents or carers. So that doesn't help. But of course, less money, time out of the office, whether you go part-time, whether you leave, of course, it's going to also have an impact on your super and the general pay gap. So it's all connected.
It sure is. Thank you for making those connections for us today on Equal Pay Day in the finance industry. I just want to switch just really quickly because actually late yesterday afternoon, the Senate Community and Affairs Reference Committee handed down its report into issues relating to menopause and perimenopause. We're really pleased to see this report. We welcome it as an important step towards breaking taboos. I think when policymakers in Canberra considering this issue, it's because community sentiment around women's health is shifting, and that's so important. It was certainly through the inquiry process that women shared that they felt disbelieved, that they were wrongly diagnosed, that they were dismissed as something mildly inconvenient when they sought their treatment. So the fact that we've got, Parliament House probably for the first time ever actually talking about perimenopause and menopause, I think is a very big step forward, and I know will help propel our own campaign across the finance industry. Plenty more to do, but I think the inquiry made clear that menopause wasn't well understood by the community, certainly not well understood in our workplaces, and that's really key and critical for us. Indeed, not well understood by some doctors. And there are 25 recommendations. Many directly relate to the points that we made in our submission and in our own, and when we appeared in front of that committee. We've got some excellent photos on the slide here of our members actually in Canberra lobbying around the issue of menopause, menstruation and reproductive health. But the report pulls out some really important things. A national menopause awareness campaign. We've just really heard already today about the importance of education and raising awareness and people understanding this issue. The report says that we need to undertake a comprehensive study to assess the economic impacts of menopause as it relates to women's workforce participation, their income, their superannuation, and the age of retirement. Angela just touched on that from a WARES perspective. The report says that we should also consider using WGEA to actually collect data on how workplaces are supporting women who are going through menopause. So what are the specific workplace policies that you're implementing, and having some data that we can look at through WGEA's capturing of that data. A really important one is considering amendments to Section 65 of the Fair Work Act to ensure that women can access flexible working arrangements during menopause. And then just a couple that I want to call out. Two more. Australian workplaces need to develop menopause workplace policies in consultation with their employees. That's exactly what we're doing and what we're talking about by launching our framework and the campaign we want to take back into our workplaces. And then considering the introduction of a gender inclusive reproductive leave entitlement in the National Employment Standards and in our modern awards. Now, these are recommendations, and the government will now need to respond to these in coming months. We've got an opportunity to just really, I suppose, ride the wave that comes off the back of these recommendations. So when we sit down with employers and we talk about paid leave, when we talk about flexible policies and flexible support arrangements, we can point to this report as essentially validating the things that we have been saying, that these are important types of reform that we need in our workplace. And whilst the government has a role to play, so do our workplaces. And we need to be active in our campaign to see our employers start to move towards the types of areas that this report has highlighted. So we're really pleased to see the things that we recommended reflected here. I think, as I said, the report sets a beautiful stage for our campaign. We now need to be calling on employers in our industry to take meaningful action to support their staff. And I think that this report helps with that work that we're doing. Sasha was on the photo, in some of those photos that were up a moment ago. She was part of the delegation that went to Parliament House last week to advocate for the type of reforms centred around the need for public education and awareness, better access to flexible work, paid leave if you need it. Sasha spoke about the fact that she had to dip into her personal leave and her long service leave earlier. She was also an active member in our recent workplace campaign to win 12 days of menopause and menstrual leave in the EA. We weren't successful. And I suppose I was just interested in getting Sasha's reflections on why is 12 days paid leave important? Why are those workplace flexibilities like work from home or staggered breaks important for those people that need it? And how do you see that making a difference in the workplace, Sasha?
Thanks, Julia. I think I kind of touched on it before with the impacts of my long service leave, and also my annual leave entitlements were affected, as well as sick leave. Like, you're taking unpaid leave, but you're also taking away from your sick leave accruals as well. I think that one thing that employers need to remember is that menopause and menstruation isn't an illness. It's a regular biological process that impacts on half the people that I work with and that we live with out in the society. We heard Jesse's experience of common conditions, and this is an everyday thing and that we need to be aware of. My employer didn't agree to paid leave. It seemed to offend them. That I think that their thought process is that just if we're asking for 12 days per person per year, that means that every single person is going to take that 12 days a year. And that's not the case. Most people are going to take half a day here, half a day there, or they'll just ask for an hour to go and have an IUD or something inserted to help relieve symptoms, or they might want to go and have a lay down for an hour because they've got a migraine. So that's where the working from home would be amazing. Like, I'm now working from home 1 day a week, but if I need to, I can say, you know what, I want to work from home tomorrow as well. I'm lucky in that aspect, so that I'm close to toilets, I'm close to a bed if I need to lay down for 5 minutes. And for me, it is really, really important to have these in place. I might not ever need to use this leave provision ever again. But as I noticed someone wrote in the chat earlier, you know, this is for their 12-year-old daughter, the differences between what my mum experienced 30 years ago to what I'm experiencing now, to what my 13-year-old daughter will experience in 10 years, 20 years in her working life. And I think that if we can make these provision changes now, we are making the world a better place. We're making people from stopping retiring too early, highly skilled and educated women and men and people who plead or are transgender or non-binary who are experiencing all these symptoms. We don't want them to leave the workplace, and that's where the working from home and these provisions would be life-changing for so many people and for our children.
Sasha, thank you. I think that's a really lovely way to kind of bring us into how we win this. And I'm going to contrast Sasha's experience at Westpac, where our 12 days of menstruation and menopause paid leave was rejected at the table. I'm going to contrast that with what happened at CBUS, and I want to share with you a CBUS case study because, like Aware, it's another industry super fund that is absolutely leading the way here. CBUS was the first Australian finance industry employer to introduce 12 days of paid menopause and menstruation leave in their EA negotiations with the union a couple of years ago. So they've been thinking about this for for some time. They introduced this leave for their employees as part of their commitment around equality and around well-being in the workplace. And they talk about this decision for them being rooted in the understanding that for their workplace to be truly inclusive and supportive, it needed to both acknowledge and address the unique challenges that face workers who menstruate and who go through menopause throughout their careers. I want to bring in Caroline Troop. She's a workplace delegate from CBUS who has been very active in our campaign, but she's going to share with us her story and her experience. Thanks, Caroline.
Thanks, Julia. So for me, my period completely changed once I turned 30. Prior to that, it was what is seen as a normal menstrual cycle. Hit 30 and I had extremely, extremely heavy periods to the point where I would bleed through a pad and a tampon, sometimes within half an hour. Sometimes I'd just have to go and spend 5 minutes in the toilet. It was also to the point where I had on my train trip into work, I had mapped out public toilets, which stations had public toilets, just in case I had to stop. I didn't have extreme pain from them. It was just extreme heavy bleeding, but I then had other health impacts. Low iron, dehydration was also a part of it. It really affected my working life. I was in a contact center at that point, and it really impacted my ability to do not just my job. I was really reluctant to go for any other roles, whether that was promotions or side steps within the contact center, and also led to almost being performance managed because I wasn't doing my job, which was extremely stressful on top of dealing with heavy bleeding. I also didn't often take sick leave. That's all I had back then. We didn't have any paid leave for menstruation. And I didn't take sick leave very often simply because I wasn't sick. And that was the whole thing for me, was that I wasn't sick, so I can't take time off just because I'm experiencing heavy bleeding. And really, really impacted my working life back then. And that was also, it also was heavy bleeding for sometimes weeks, if not months at a time. The only thing that fixed it back then was a pill, but only not really assisting that much. And for me, the change for me was I had just a slightly lower hormone. I had a hormone imbalance, which created the heavy periods. Extremely uncomfortable. It was horrible. It was just horrible.
Caroline, thank you for sharing that. And, you know, you're not alone, because we had, of course, we've been working closely with CBUS on this. And so we've got a quote on the screen that I wanted to share from one of your colleagues, L'Oreal, who says that when she started at CBUS, she was just relieved to see that CBUS offered paid leave, but the leave wasn't just leave, and it was more than just this tokenistic leave, but it really validated and destigmatized these awkward conversations around periods. And she goes on to say, as you can see here, that it's important for the policy to be supported by culture, and culture means that it's safe to talk about these things where her manager chooses to believe pain that they can't see. And I thought that was such a beautiful quote to kind of sum up why we're doing this campaign, why we're launching this campaign today. I want to flip from L'Oreal's view as a worker and just swing back into the employer's perspective. On the screen in a moment, we're going to have a quote from Justine Hartman, who's the Chief People Officer. And Justine says that, you know, this is about health, it's about equality, it's about diversity, and it's about recognising the unique needs of every person in the workforce. And so I think that this picks up on a really important point, Caroline, and I just wanted to ask you about this leave and the support framework, and how has that played out at CBUS, and how do you see the shift in the conversation, and then thinking about that through culture? Like, have you seen a cultural shift in the way that L'Oreal describes and talks about it?
I definitely have seen a culture shift. Having the paid leave, and also we've got flexibility within that clause as well. It really helped remove that wall and that stigma that is attached to menstruation and menopause. I just have, when I'm in the office, I occasionally have random conversations with people about what symptoms they're suffering at the moment. started talking about perimenopause and menopause symptoms, and sharing that experience just helps also educate me, because I've started experiencing perimenopause symptoms, and some of them I didn't know they were actually perimenopause symptoms. So it's a lot more open, being able to discuss not just our symptoms, but I've even started having conversations with my male manager about menopause, and he opened up to the fact that his wife was going through that. And it's opened that ability to be able to talk to people, and removing that stigma around being a woman. And it is absolutely amazing how much the culture has actually changed at CBUS.
Sounds really, really positive. I want you to take us back a few years when the union first started talking about this and our claim for paid leave and the flexible work options. You obviously connected to that because you had your own experience and what you'd been dealing with in terms of your really heavy periods. But why did you get involved in the campaign? How did you get involved, and what kind of shifted the boss at the table through those negotiations? How did you win this?
So I got involved in the campaign by being part of the negotiation team for the enterprise agreement, and it was a FSU policy to include menstruation and menopause leave in all log of claims. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, "Yep, I'm definitely 100% backing that." And had quite a few conversations with union members. We did have to convince some union members that this was an important leave. And we had quite a lot of union members that were also like advocating and campaigning to make sure that it was included in our log of claims. And from there at the negotiation table, I shared my story, and I was open and honest. I explained that I did, back when I was experiencing extremely heavy periods, I didn't feel comfortable talking to my manager about it, because you didn't back then. And it was just something that we as women we just kept going. We just had to soldier on, and we just had to keep on going, no matter what pain, what bleeding we were going under. And it was sharing my story, and one of the other people as well sharing their story as well, that convinced CBUS to include it in our enterprise agreement.
Excellent. We're going to come back to sharing our story because we want more women feeling confident and brave to tell their stories. And we're going to ask you about that in a moment. So thank you for sharing that. But I think, what we've seen here from the CBUS case study that Caroline's taken us through is that winning an EA clause for the 12 days paid leave and a reference to flexible work, I think that has been central to creating a workplace, as we've heard, where the culture has kind of shifted, where it's very open and we're talking about it. And that started because we decided to make a claim for it. So I think that's a really excellent case study. If you're here today and your workplace is getting ready for an upcoming negotiation, and we negotiate right across the sector all the time, if you're about to sit down and negotiate a new collective agreement, we've got one coming up in Suncorp. We're going to be sitting down with Aware Super towards the end of the year, for example. Then I hope that this meeting has shown you what it can be like through that CBUS example, that by getting involved, by being more active through the union, that you can achieve what Caroline has described. Because, like Caroline, we had to organise for it. She said, I had to talk to those people who didn't really understand it in the beginning. They didn't see its purpose or value, but we also had members that supported it. And by bringing those people together, that's organising, we were able to, step up and really start to be active around this issue. So there might be an opportunity for you to start a conversation with your workmate. It could be as simple as, I just went to this excellent union meeting where I heard more about the campaign to provide flexibilities and paid support at work for those of us who are experiencing menopause or heavy periods. It could be as simple as that, to just start to break that taboo, all the way through to, I'm going to be at the negotiations just like Caroline, because I've got a story to tell, and I know those stories are powerful, and that's what moves decision makers when they hear those stories directly by those that have been impacted by those symptoms. So I really want to encourage you that if you're here today, it's probably because this is an issue that's important to you, and hopefully after this meeting that you might really feel comfortable to share your own experiences with your workmates. And this does pick up on, we had many of you submit questions before today's meeting, and it picks up on one of the questions that came through, which was, how do I engage others who aren't experiencing menopause, and how do I bring them into the conversation so that they see that this is a priority? I'm going to go back to your story is so powerful. No one can take your lived experience away from you. So, start to be confident to share that experience with your workmates so that they can understand why it's important for you. Because I think that's going to make them more aware and therefore more likely to support the campaign, even if it's an issue that doesn't affect them. The other thing we often talk about in the union is that we talk about this through the lens of equity. This is an equity issue. And we always say that equality is about treating everybody the same, offering everyone the same opportunities. But equity recognises that whilst we have those same opportunities, we need to take into account that some individuals might need specific support. They might need a step up. And that's what this is about. This is about saying we want our workplaces to be equal, but to be equitable. And that's when we know that our workplaces are more inclusive, that's when we know our workplaces are more diverse. And all the research shows that workplaces with inclusive culture, where everybody's unique needs are recognised, they are just better places to work. So whilst your colleague might not see this as a personal priority for them, I think if you talk about it through that equity lens, then you're starting to really demonstrate that this makes our team better, this makes our workplace better, and that's why I want you to support this claim for a framework and for paid leave. So if you do step up and you do share your stories, I know that that's how we break the taboos, and that's how we win it in our workplaces. To support you to take that action, we've got a beautiful flyer that can help you have a conversation. It's essentially a short version of the framework, and use it like a conversation flyer. Send it to somebody. Say, hey, I went to this meeting, or hey, have you thought about this issue? I know that we've had a conversation about our own kind of transition, but did you know that there's a campaign that the union is leading in our workplace? So I really want to encourage you to pick up that flyer and to use it. On the page here, you'll see the QR code. It takes you actually to our webpage, where you will find other resources, the framework, this conversation starter, plus many other collateral and information that I think you'll find useful. I can see the clock is winding down and we're getting closer to 1, but we do have some questions that have come through beforehand. And I know Nicole has been curating some questions in the chat. So I'm going to try and move through these really quickly. So if I throw to you, panelists, I'm going to ask for some quick responses to these, and Nicole might also let us know of some, but let's start with the ones that have come in. Angela, I'm going to ask you about this one, because we've heard some opponents to this make some suggestions that this might somehow make employers reluctant to hire women, when indeed the whole point of this is to ensure that their talents and their experience is not lost to the labour market. I thought from an employer's perspective, I was interested in how you might respond to those suggestions that have been made.
Yeah, quick response is I completely disagree. You could say the same for parental leave, however many years ago, family domestic violence leave. And I would say it's had the opposite effect. It's made people feel more included, like they belong, and it has not had that impact. So I disagree.
Sasha, we've spoken a little bit today about Westpac not going far enough in the recent negotiations. And whilst the EA does recognise the symptoms of menopause and menstruation, they didn't agree to paid leave. So we've heard you today talk about the fact that you've had to access your own leave. Thinking about this through that campaign that we want to be running in our workplaces, what advice do you have for us about how to think about our EA campaigns differently? Like, what would you have done differently to build greater support for this claim, for that bargain?
I think absolutely organising. Start building up your structures, identify the people who care about your issue and are passionate about it, and who are happy to talk about it to anybody and everyone, be it the CEO, your male CEO or your male leader. You're just going to have to start building up your coalition, so to speak, of supporters and work from there.
Excellent. Great. I've got a question here about a mandate and whether or not the 50% mandates where we've seen those come into place has made it more challenging for women to manage their symptoms. Look, I think in some instances it probably has, but I think that there are many workplaces that are now open to a conversation around flexibility and the type of flexible support that might be needed. So I would really encourage anybody who's here today who has not actually thought about making an approach for a more flexible arrangement or to embed those flexibilities and support in the workplace, I'd encourage you to start that conversation. And if you need support from the union, reach out through all the different ways that you can engage with us, because we can help with that conversation at the workplace level if you need that. Is a doctor's certificate required? How do I approach my manager about this? We've spoken a bit already about how do we approach our managers and the role that education can play. We heard Angela talk about what they're doing at Aware Super. I might throw to you, Angela, in terms of like, how do you think about evidence, and what do you require from people who do take the paid leave?
Yeah, I think like any policy, because I think one of the questions that concerns came up around what if people, really take advantage of this and they don't use it for what they need to be using it for. I think any policy needs to have, if required, we may need to, provide, you need to provide doc certificates, but I think you need to go in with trust first. And I think unless it's absolutely required and you've got your doubts for whatever reason it may be as an employer, I wouldn't be asking until that point in time.
Great. Caroline, I'm going to throw, I think, the last question to you, because Joanne's asked, what is the best practice at the moment across the sector?
So best practice at CBUS, we've just negotiated a brand new enterprise agreement. We will also be having an additional 5 days paid leave for reproductive and planned parenthood leave, and that covers anything to do with your reproductive health, whether that's IVF appointments, if you need to have a vasectomy, it covers everything. So we have 12 days paid menstruation and menopause leave with a lot of flexibility clauses, but also an additional 5 days reproductive and planned parenthood leave as well.
I can see a question that's just come through from Sam Halliday about how much of that leave people are using at CBUS. When we asked them that same question, Sam, it was very, very low. And in part because it's still a fairly new policy and initiative at the workplace. And we hope that over time, more women will access it. But it certainly has not, we haven't seen the sky fall in, and it's not costing the business an extreme amount of money because of this. I think from memory, I think there was about 70 days in the entire 12-month period over a workforce that's got probably close to 800 people. So fairly low take up. We hope with more education that people will lean into that further. We've got a minute to go, so I'm going to wrap up unless Nicole takes the call and says that there is some burning questions. And if Nicole thinks that there isn't, because we've covered them in broad terms.
Covered them beautifully.
Great, excellent. Okay, I want to say this. I think the finance industry has an excellent opportunity right now to take the lead to break these stigmas and taboos. We've got an opportunity to be thinking about the education and the support that we can be delivering in our workplaces. And I truly believe every single day we are fighting for enterprise agreements because they shape workplace culture. They drive the kinds of behaviours and standards and culture that we want. And having an EA in place, a support framework alongside that paid leave, I do believe will improve and will regulate the kind of standards and the kind of culture that we want to see across the finance industry. So I think that to everybody that's been on the call today, I really want to thank you. As I said, we really would like to see you be more active. There is a link on the page, on our webpage. We'd love for you to click through if you'd like to get more involved and tell us how you'd like to do that. And we'll follow up with a phone call in the next few days and talk that through with you. I think that developing our workplace policies that support flexible work, that give you the right to request for flexibility, where you've got paid leave if you need it, this is essentially what we're campaigning for. And with your support, getting more active, I know that we will win these rights. So really, again, thank you to everybody for joining us today. get more involved, go to the webpage, click through. A special thank you to Caroline and Sasha. I think because today what you did is you really kickstarted, I think, what is an incredibly important conversation. Today we saw the quelling of the stigma that's associated with these conditions, and I hope that it's helped women who are on this call today who have been suffering in silence to say, I can do that. I can start a conversation. So again, thank you to Caroline, to Sasha, and to Angela, because together you've really shown us that what we can do, both as workers and as employers, to break taboos across the finance industry. So thanks again, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and we hope to see you really more involved in this campaign as we bring it into your workplace. Thanks, everybody.